So let's switch over to everybody's favorite topic, security. You've got, software is a critical element of every organization's infrastructure and every organization's ability to deliver its business. And so the security of that software, as well as the infrastructure that delivers that software, becomes critical. And given the role Spinnaker plays in the software lifecycle, that security really has to start with Spinnaker itself. So Gopi, I know that the oversight committee, as well as you personally, have spent a lot of time on security over the last year. Tell us some of the things that are happening there.
Yeah, what you said is exactly right. The delivery infrastructure is a critical part, primarily when we are seeing the supply chain as one of the critical infrastructure elements that are being attacked. So Spinnaker is a critical infrastructure component. Over the last year, there has been a significant effort in securing the Spinnaker itself. Security is, of course, is a layered approach. The first one being securing the images. So there is a work in community that reduces the vulnerabilities that are there in the Spinnaker images by upgrading the libraries and getting to a secure base OS image. So we also put in the requirement for FedRAMP where UBI8 images are made the base. We built the Spinnaker components based on the UBI8, and we now are at a place where we have 0 critical vulnerabilities in the images that we are shipping. We are contributing back to the OSS, and there is a little bit of lag with the OSS on the contributions and the process that it goes through. But OSS is also getting there in terms of reducing the vulnerabilities in the components. And that's a critical piece. And the second one, of course, is making it the good support for secrets management. And you don't want the secrets unencrypted in transit or in the storage, and being able to specify the configuration of the Spinnaker itself, as well as providing support for the applications that are being deployed to use the secrets manager. There are public cloud environments that are providing secrets managers and that have integration with the IAM. And also HashiCorp Vault and other type of systems are extensively used in enterprises. So there is a support for these systems now. There's built-in support with the Spring framework, with the Spinnaker, and we have extensions to support these secrets for the application deployments. So these are exciting enhancements that make it much more easy to use, secure way of deploying your applications.
Very cool. Very cool.
The next one is
the Gopi.
Yeah, this is the one that we're fairly excited about, and a lot of our customers are asking, and some are using. This is the governance guardrails. If Spinnaker supports this plugin framework extensibility. So if you have an existing pipeline, you don't need to change the pipeline to take advantage of the policy controls on it. So the way it works is based on the events that are happening in the pipeline, you can set up the configuration to call a OPA server and have the customizable Rego file with the OPA server executes based on the event that is coming in. You can use it for the blackout windows, for example, or Sarbanes-Oxley checks, and make it very customizable in terms of what kind of policies you want. As an enterprise, giving self-service to developers with their pipelines, you want to put some controls in. That makes it a good, simple mechanism to extend Spinnaker to provide those kind of controls. And of course, as a system, one of the core considerations for security is also business continuity and providing the configuration as code, as in some Git repository with versioning, being able to restore the for a new instance, and having an audit to know exactly what has happened at any given point in time are critical. Spinnaker provides quite a few hooks to make this happen, and most of our implementations use those capabilities to provide that backup and recovery, centralized auditing, and make it easy for them to track the changes at any given point in time for any compliance requirements. So there has been a lot of improvements over the last year, and more to come on these lines.
Gopi, from a committee standpoint, what's the committee thinking as kind of the biggest next security area to focus within Spinnaker?
So the vulnerability checks, secrets management are the core things that continue to extend. The next one is also in terms of machine-to-machine communication. There are RFCs on that one to use the SPIFFE and SPIRE. Basically, the
Mhm.
certificate management system integration, and also for these stages when we are integrating with third-party components, say databases and things like that, or custom stages that are doing custom deployments or integrating with DevOps, other DevOps tools, use those certificates management to make it a much more secure way of communicating, and also provide RBAC based on who's using that pipeline. And so those are some of the enhancements that on the security side that are exciting in discussions this year.
That's great. That's great. And I think the point, I think the key here is that all this is designed to make Spinnaker a secure foundational component, right? You need to secure the rest of the software stack, but you want to start with a really secure base. And so I think the work that you and the committee have been doing over the last year really start to build that out and make that happen. So, and hopefully everybody sees that here in the comments. I know we've had a couple of good questions already. If anyone is looking for has additional questions, please add those in as we go. Um, but otherwise, let's take a step one level up in the software stack here, right? We've talked about making Spinnaker that secure foundation, but how can we then use Spinnaker as part of securing the application lifecycle? After all, application deployments is the whole point of Spinnaker as a platform. Application security posture management, for example, is one of the core themes of how do I understand at any moment the current state of the security of my application. And the good news is there's been some important work there on Spinnaker. So, Bob, I'm going to hand it over to you to take this discussion.
Great, thanks, David. So, guys, I think the things that we've seen happen here, just in general, have really been amazing, right? I think the industry as a whole, and I think the software vendors and software developers are starting to take sort of end-to-end security much more seriously, right? Because now they've recognized the fact that sort of bad guys are not just focused on one area. They're not going to spend their days waiting for someone to trip upon a typo squatting scenario, or sort of putting something out there, and just they've grown very impatient. And so what that's forced across the software business is this idea of end-to-end application security, right? And so when people hear about application security, we immediately gravitate toward things like vulnerability management, right? Which is absolutely a critical piece. But like when we start looking at sort of what is ASPM, I want people to think that the people that I work with and I'm talking to, and the people when I deliver sessions like this is sort of from the source code all the way through to and including the deployment environment and the posture, the security posture that has been undertaken, and the visibility into that. And so for us, as we sat down and looked at Spinnaker and looked at sort of how do we want to go about doing this, and sort of adding this to the Spinnaker stack, right? We obviously there were a handful of things that were extremely important. One is application context, right? So, I don't want to manage end-to-end security as a big blob, right? I want to manage it on an application by application basis. I want my thinking and the way I go about looking at this to follow the delivery process, right? I think that's something that we're all familiar with, right? So I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and they said, geez, what is it about that frame that you guys are so enamored with? And what I told that person was to look at application security posture as you're moving through the delivery process is probably one of the more proactive approaches to a problem that you'll see, right? Because you're not waiting for it to sort of complete and then, for lack of a better term, trying to put toothpaste back in the tube when you find an issue. Here, we're looking at this across each stage of the software delivery lifecycle and saying, do I see any problems. And some of these issues that we're checking for are more static and more configuration driven. Others are very dynamic, right? When it comes to things like vulnerability management and open source licensing, these things can be dynamic. And then I think, making sure that we're focused on things like release integrity. One of the things that I when we started to talk about this was I don't want to stop at the actual application itself and the services that make up that application. I want to check for a security posture in terms of where this application is going to land as well, right? So that's what gets us, sort of getting Spinnaker to integrate and sort of our layer on top of that with Deploy Shield to integrate with things like Kubescape or, Checkoff or other areas where we can assess the security posture end to end, right? And then obviously new vulnerability monitoring. I think, when you think about this, we're all familiar with the famous and most common vendors that are out there. We're not looking to replace those guys. We're actually looking to enhance the actionability of the data that they're presenting. So that's, sort of an overview of what our thinking was here. If we want to pop to the next slide, David, that'd be great.
I got a little bit of lag here, but I'm not sure why. There we
No
go.
worries. There we go. So this, guys, when we talk about this, right? I always like to start with a slide like this because it helps. Honestly, I'm a techie as well, and so my house looks like a Best Buy. I love to understand things and how things work and whatnot. And so I always like to start with this. We're not splitting the atom here, right? What we're doing is we're saying, let's take all the tooling that you currently have in place, right? And, picture Spinnaker sitting on top of this, but also picture something else, right? Like if it's Argo, if it's Jenkins CD, if it's GitHub Actions, whatever it happens to be, right? And then think about all the investments in the tooling that you've made within your ecosystem. The beauty of this is that we're not asking you to make any of those changes. We can actually go ahead and actually, again, from an end to end, linking all the way back to the setup and configuration of your source code repository, right? And very rarely do you have any sort of malicious intent when you do that. If there's something wrong, it's just somebody made a mistake or someone didn't think about something, right? So all the way through to how you handle your build system, and are the webhooks that your build system are emitting or receiving, are those secure? Is the build system like Jenkins, are you using the most secure version of that? And then as we move through to sort of how data flows, we look at, your artifact repositories, and, are we making sure that the artifact that was built is the one that lands in the repository, and then is the one that landed in the repository ultimately the one that gets deployed? So again, by bringing ourselves into a situation where we can collect this data, put it into a secure data warehouse, right? Ultimately get that sort of end-to-end view of all the data that we're collecting, and then start the process of applying not only visibility to that data through a series of dashboards that we're gonna look at here in just a bit, but also extend the work we've done within Spinnaker with policies and a policy engine and policy enforcement. Where what we're doing is we're saying, hey, let's go out and figure out, what is NIST saying about application security posture? What is FedRAMP saying about it? What are other, sort of frameworks that our customers are following? What are those types of things? And I think that policy engine piece is where you can really codify your SDLC, right? You can really sort of bring that to life. And then ultimately going as far as blocking deployments for violations, right? So if there's something very critical that's going on, you want to be aware of it, but you also might want to say, let's stop this deployment in the event we get this type of violation until we've had a chance to get our arms around what's happening. So again, we're being proactive. We're not being reactive, right? We're sort of flipping the switch on that stance. And so that's sort of what that overall architecture looks like. If you want to flip to the next slide, David. And this is a little bit more of a practitioner's view here, right? So again, when we think about the way code flows, right? And we think about the developer to the source code, to the build system, to the deploy, to the actual deployment, and then sort of that environment where it's actually running. Again, you need end-to-end visibility here. And I think, there are going to be some more static things, like, the way you manage your source code. Typically, those things are set it and forget it. However, they can be misconfigured. Somebody could have been in there poking around and unintentionally turned something off. Again, you want to pay attention to that. And people always ask me, why do you think that's so important? It's because the bad guys are going to pay attention to it, right? They're going to be paying attention to the way you manage your source code. And if there's an opportunity for them to exploit something all the way to that left side, well, they're going to do it, right? And then we move through the source code management, the build process, all of those phases, right? We've set up and designed, sort of a set of checks that we're going to do, and we're gathering the data that we need to evaluate those checks. And then this is all riding on top of that Spinnaker workflow that you've deployed or you've developed, right? So again, think of this as additive in the Spinnaker world, where you don't have to rewrite your workflow. You don't have to, make any of these changes. You simply plug something like this in, and we're already thinking about it in the same way that the traditional CD tooling like Spinnaker is thinking about it. So there's really zero net new changes that you need to make to process. You just need to decide how you want to handle problems, right? So do you want to just audit them? Do you want to actually enforce? That's the only real thing that you need to think about, because we're now giving you all that visibility. And that's sort of the way this flows. So let's
Well, I
start
think
taking a look at a little bit of that. Yeah, go ahead,
I
David. I'm
think,
sorry.
well, as I say, one of the things I think it's interesting here is that, every application has to go through the deployment process, which means if you're using Spinnaker as your continuous deployment tool, that gives you a pretty unique point of control. I think one of the things we hear from our current customers is that DevOps is very distributed. It's very scattered. People like to use lots of different tools, like to do things lots of different ways, right? But I think, you've got here in the picture and in the previous architecture is this idea that at the end of the day, all the stuff you care about is going to go through the deployment process. And so, really, let's start using Spinnaker and the deployment platform itself as a key point of control in the overall application security lifecycle.
That's
Okay.
such a great point, David. I think it's very well said, right? It's about, in a diverse environment, normalizing that evaluation of the most important stuff. So yeah, I think that's well said. Well said.